Hello, everyone. And we're back with yet another NF Core bite-sized talk. Thanks for joining us. We hope you've been finding the talk so far useful. And we'd like to begin by thanking the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative for funding the series. So today on Bite Size, we have Phil Ewels from SciLife Lab in Sweden and one of the NF core team members, covering how to merge automated pull requests and addressing what automated NF core sync does. As usual, if you have any questions, keep them coming through the chat box on Zoom and on YouTube, and I will relay them across to Phil. So let's begin.
Thanks very much, Manuka. 2 weeks in a row for me. Apologies if you're tired of my voice, but hopefully we'll keep it a bit shorter this week. As Manuka said, I'm going to go over how template synchronization works. So this talk is really targeted at pipeline developers, people who are building pipelines within the NF Core ecosystem, or building your own pipeline based on the NF Core toolset. So just a quick refresher, because all of this is based very heavily on Git and GitHub. So very quickly go over some of the stuff we've covered before, that all of NF Core is based on Git. We use Git for everything. And Git is a version control code system, and basically has a couple of concepts, a couple of bits of jargon you need to know. You do commits, which are little packages of work. So you do some edits and then you bundle them together and you say this is a commit, and that's like checkpoints in the timeline of your code. And they go in a kind of a straight line, you can imagine. And then you can make branches like this, where you can work on 2 different things at the same time. And then you can carry on working on that branch. And then if you want to, you can merge that branch back into the main line of the commit history. So branching and merging. You can fork an entire repository, which basically sort of copies a repository of code to your account. So for example, here I've forked an NF Core pipeline to my personal GitHub username, and then you can carry on doing development on your fork as well. And when you want to contribute what you've done back to the main repository within NF Core, you then open up a pull request, and just like branches, that is then merged into the main line of commits, and all of the stuff that you've done is now in part of the main repository. Forks, branches, GitHub. All our NF Core pipelines have at least 3 branches called dev, master, and template. The master branch is the default after the first release, and the master branch should only ever have the latest stable release code. And that's so if someone runs Nextflow with the pipeline name but doesn't specify a release, it will grab the default branch, which is master, and that will be the latest stable release, and that's what they'll run. So that's a kind of sensible logic that we want. The dev branch is where we do all the development work. So that's a kind of bleeding edge. It should still be stable on dev, but it's still, it's kind of changing all the time. And when we're ready for a release, we merge dev into master. Finally, we have this kind of special branch, which is a bit less standard, called template, all in capital letters. And that's what I'm going to be talking about largely today. So this is one of the figures from the NF Core paper, and it describes a little bit more detail how the automated sync works from the NF Core template. So the way that we keep all of this code, one of the main things we offer really through the NF Core organization is this template, this pipeline template. You can do NF Core create. It asks you a couple of questions, a name, a description, and an author, and it creates a minimal but functional pipeline. And it has a lot of the boilerplate code that we think is best practice for a Nextflow pipeline. So it sets up lots of config stuff, and it creates all the code structure into different files. It sets up things for GitHub Actions, automated tests, continuous integration. It sets up all kinds of things for you. So you just get that for free. But that template never stands still. We're adding to it all the time, and it grows with the community and with our experience. And so if we find we fix a thing in one of the pipelines, which is general, we try and bring that back into the main template. But of course, once you've done NF Core create, your repository is then separate and no longer tracks along with the NF Core template. So that's what we're trying to bring in here. So the trick that we figured out was to, when you make your pipeline, you straight away make your commits where you haven't done any changes. It's just a template, and you have that initial commit with the template. And we fork that at that point. Sorry, we branch at that point a new branch called template, which has the same shared commit. Then you just forget about that template branch. You just carry on doing whatever you do on master and dev. But when there's a new release of the NF Core template, we create a new commit along a special template branch. Now, here we've got one commit and there's two commit, and the only changes on this branch are the things that we updated in the main template. And this is always the case for the template branch. It only ever has the vanilla template from the main NF core template. And the commits are only ever just updates from the as we do new releases of tools. When you get a new commit, then we can do a pull request from that branch into the development branch, and those updates are pulled into a dev branch. So anything that's changed in the boilerplate code is brought into dev, but it never goes the other way. Dev is never brought into template. So hopefully that makes sense. So what then, and finally, we automate this process so that when we do a new release of the tools repository, all of this stuff kind of always commits and always changes happen automatically, and the pull requests are automatically opened. So what does this synchronization process do step by step? First, it's pretty simple, really. It's pretty kind of brute force. First of all, it gets a copy of your pipeline, and it checks out the special template branch. It deletes everything. Literally just like RMRF, just kills everything in that pipeline. And then it creates a new pipeline from scratch using the NF core create tools. But this time, of course, what you're using the NF core tools package and its latest release. And so it uses the latest version of a template that comes bundled in there. So this new version now has all the modifications that we've made since the last release. Those changes, if there are any, are committed into a template branch. We actually have added something quite recently, just probably this year, I think, Kevin added it, where we actually make a special branch at this point. I'll go into why in a second, but it's exactly the same as template. And then we open a pull request with these changes to the dev branch. And what's really clever then is that Git just knows what to do. You've been doing thousands of commits on dev, and template branch has 3 commits. And it's just changed these bits, and you've done loads of other stuff around it, but Git knows that the only bits which are relevant are these bits here. And most of the time it's very intelligent about that. And it's just black magic to me, but it does seem to work. So then you review that pull request and you merge it in, and you have the latest changes. Right, I like to live dangerously. And we've got a little special surprise for you today, which is that NF core tools here, we have been working hard on a new release, and we have a 1.14 release coming up. And in fact, it's all prepped and ready to go. Everyone's been reviewing pull requests for me this morning as I rushed to get this talk ready. And here we are on the release page. So I've just written in the changelog. We've already merged to master, all the tests are passing. And so I'm going to hit release now, and we'll see if the synchronization process works. I was saying just before the talk, I don't think the automated sync has ever worked completely flawlessly all the way through. So it's almost certainly going to fail somehow. Let's hope it's not too spectacular. So I hit publish, there we go, tools is released. Now, if I go to the GitHub Actions page, you can see lots of stuff is happening here because of a release automatically. And one that we're interested in is called sync template. Here we go, the sync has started. So the first step is to find a list of all the NF core pipelines here. So it gets that from the NF core website. And now it knows all of those and it kicks off jobs, and there's a synchronization job for every single one of the NF core pipelines, of which there's now a lot. And then it will go through all of these and synchronize all of them and open up a pull request for every single one. There's now so many that GitHub thinks that we are abusing the API and basically trying to do a DDoS attack on GitHub, and it stops all of our pull requests. That's what broke last time. Hopefully I've added code that will fix it this time, but we will see. We'll see how many red crosses we get. So you can see it's doing all the steps I just talked about. It's checked out the code. It's now installed NF core. It's now installing Nextflow, and it's running with synchronization. So it's got all the variables it needs from the dev branch, like the author, the description. It's checked out the template branch, and it has crashed horribly. But you can see it committed the changes to the template branch. It pushed to the template branch on the remote. Oops. Okay, we've got a new bug. It made a new branch. It pushed that branch to the remote, and then it tried to make an API, and something in here is wrong. And we got a bug. However, let's see if anything actually opened. There we go. Okay, it crashed, but it actually worked before it crashed by the look of it. So thankfully, we have our automated pull request. Now, if I go to this repository, you can also look on the branches. We can see the template branch here. If I look at the commit history, you can see there's a commit for each one of the releases of tools. And this is the new commit that we've just pushed. And these are all the things that have changed then in the template since last time. And now if I go to a special branch called nfcore template merge, and looks exactly the same, and that's where the pull request comes from. So this is where you start, basically. If you're a pipeline developer, you will have just got a pull request, hopefully, in your inbox. And you'll go in and you should see something like this, hopefully explaining what to do. Now, there's some stuff running here. This is where it gets a bit more interesting. Nearly all the time, there are some merge conflicts because you've been working on all the pipeline files, and then in this parallel branch, there are changes to the same pipeline files. And so Git does very, very well at figuring out what should go where, but it does usually need a little bit of help. And sometimes it's just one or two files, and sometimes it's half the pipeline. So there's nearly always some merge conflicts to fix. So there are, let me remember how far through I got with the slides. So there are a couple of ways to do this, basically. If it's just small and simple, then GitHub will give you, this button here will not be grayed out. And you can click on that button and it will open up a browser, basically. See if I can find another one where it is allowing me to do this. There we go. So we've got some conflicts here, but they're a bit simpler, and this button is not grayed out. So I can click on that, and it will take me to the files which have got the merge conflicts, and you can see it highlights the merge conflicts here. So here it says, okay, probably this line here has been edited in both. I don't know what to do here. And so in this case, I think this looks more up to date and more what we want to keep. So I delete this part of the merge conflict, and I delete that marker, and I say marker was resolved, and I just go on to the next one. And I work through the files like this. This is only really viable if the merge conflicts are few and simple, because you have to manually deal with the merge conflict markers, delete them, and it's quite easy to make a mistake. So this is fine if it's just a couple of very simple things, but generally I would avoid doing this. Very often that button will be grayed out if there's just too much for Git to do in the web interface, and it says, okay, you have to use the command line here. And in which case, basically, you can do it on a branch, but I would recommend doing it on your fork, just as you would any other work. So the process then is to update your personal fork of the repository, so it's up to date with dev, make a new branch to do this work, and then you pull in the changes from an upstream repository on the template branch. Now, if you watched the last bytesize talk I gave, I think it was, I talked a little bit about how to pull in changes from upstream repositories. So check that out if you're not quite sure. But typically you have two remotes. You have origin, which is your fork, and then you would set up upstream, which is the nfcore fork. So you can do git pull upstream template, and that will try and pull the changes from the template branch. It will complain. It will say there's a bunch of merge conflicts, and then you can fix those in your editor. And again, in the last talk, I showed you how in VS Code, for example, VS Code has a lot of tools to do this in a more visual and less error-prone manner. So you can go through all of those, fix them up in your browser, commit them, push to your fork, as you would normally, and then open a pull request from your fork into the main repository. Remember that pull requests update dynamically. So when you do that, you will have pulled this commit here into your personal fork. And when you open up your pull request, it will have the same commit, and then it will have your merge conflict fixes underneath, which will be your own commits. And when you merge that, this pull request will automatically show up as being merged, because Git will see that this commit is now in the dev branch. So basically, if you're going to do that, don't worry about this pull request. Don't close it. Just leave it there, because then if you do hit trouble or run out of time and don't finish your personal fork or whatever, it's still clear that there's a template update waiting to be done. So don't worry about this, just leave it there, and it doesn't matter if you do your own fix, it should sort itself out. Most importantly, follow the documentation. If I go to developers, template synchronization, the pull request also links to this. It says where the link is. there is basically a step-by-step walkthrough to how to do everything I've just described. It says how it works, and then we say how to actually do the minor conflicts and how to do all this stuff which I just described in the talk, along with example commands and everything. I follow this documentation myself, even though I've done this hundreds of times. So don't be afraid to follow the docs. It's generally pretty good, I think. It has some other stuff about how to do really much more difficult types of synchronization, which you don't want to do if you can avoid it. Use the nfcore create command is the thing there. And a few other bits about how to fix stuff when it goes wrong. But hopefully most of that is behind us now that we have this new system. The reason this comes from a branch is that if you fix the merged conflicts using this little button here, then all of the dev history will be pulled into this branch as part of fixing a merge conflicts. That's how merges work. Now, if this was coming from a template branch, that's then bad, because the template branch then contains all of your development code. And the next time you run a template sync, it deletes the whole pipeline and creates a template. And so then Git thinks, okay, you deleted all of the pipeline. That must be what you want, which is not what you want. So you want that template branch to be completely clean. So that's why we've started using these branches. So that if you do merge dev into there, it doesn't matter, because we just discard these branches afterwards and the template branch stays clean. One of the things that came out in the latest or last version of nfcore lint for pipeline linting is an option called --fix, where some pipeline tests, for example, the important ones are the ones which check that a file hasn't been modified from a template. So if there's some like core file, which basically you shouldn't ever have to touch, it will compare the two and it will say, okay, this doesn't look like I expect it to. And if you do --fix, then the test name, it will just delete that file and create what it expects. So it's blunt. Just check the git diff after you run this to make sure it's only doing stuff that you want and hasn't deleted any of your custom code. But that can be, if those files aren't anything you've touched in your pipeline, that can be much quicker than trying to resolve merge conflicts. You can just run nfcore lint and you end up with the right file. I said that already, that pull requests will close themselves. And yeah, remember that this is spitting out these new branches the whole time. So when you're finished with all of this, it's nice just to go through and delete any of the branches that you don't need anymore. Right, with that, I'm a couple of minutes over, but not too bad. So let me know if I missed anything. Please shout if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to go over those or talk about anything in more detail.
Thanks, Phil. Are there any questions at this point? You could just pop them in the chat and I can read them out.
One thing I didn't mention, anyone who's watching this, you might be a developer of a pipeline that isn't part of nfcore, but you use the nfcore tooling. Now, if I go to the automated run here, or that failed, and look at the commands, you can see that basically we ran the nfcore sync command. Anyone can run the nfcore sync command. It should work on any pipeline. It doesn't matter if it's just locally on your computer. It doesn't matter if it's part of the nfcore organization or anything. And it will pull in the changes as long as you have that template branch there. It won't create the automatic pull requests and stuff, but it will synchronize the template for you and set that up. So yeah, you don't get all the automation if it's not part of nfcore, but you can still synchronize your pipeline with the nfcore template to keep it up to date.
Okay, so there don't seem to be any questions that have popped up at this point. So before you go and continue your discussion on the Slack channel, I'd like to, I've mentioned this before, but we do have transcripts for most of our videos so far, and you can find them on our website. And if you have any ideas on how to make our content even more accessible, please let us know. We're waiting to hear from you. So, well, see you all next week then.